The League of Women Voters East Shore and Tutucket Television proudly present the 86th State Representative District Candidates Debate, featuring Green Party candidate Colin Sowney, Republican candidate Vincent Candelora, and Democratic candidate Vincent Mays Jr. And now, here's your moderator, Elise Lowe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 86th District State Representative Debate, hosted by the League of Women Voters of the East Shore and Tutucket TV. This evening, I want you to greet our three candidates for this seat. They are Vincent Mays, Democrat, Vincent Candelora, Republican, and Colin Sowney, Green Party. Thank you. The gentlemen have been offered 1 minute for an opening statement to summarize their qualifications to be the next state representative for this district. And we will begin with Mr. Mace. There was a drawing for order, and so they're sitting in the order in which they will rotate, taking turns answering the questions. Mr. Mace will begin.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Vince Mace. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity and Evergreen Woods for this fine facility to allow us to be here tonight. I've lived in Northford for 34 years. I was a mailman for 30 years. Throughout those 30 years, 26 of them I spent going to school to become a lawyer. I'm also a member of the North Branford Board of Education, hoping to further advance the educational system for North Branford students. As an attorney, I'm qualified because I do a lot of labor law, do a lot of articulation, do a lot of study and research, and I'm able to work along both sides with the other side in adversarial situations. And being in the state capitol as a Democrat, I can work with the Republicans, the independent parties, and whoever, and I ask for your opportunity to go there and do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Candelora.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for the League of Women Voters and Evergreen Woods for hosting this event. My name is Vincent Candelora. I'm currently state representative for the 86th District. I've served for 12 years in Hartford. I'm raising my three children in the town of North Branford. I was born and raised here as well. My background, I run and operate a family facility, the Connecticut Sportsplex here in North Branford. And up in Hartford, I have served on the Finance Revenue Bond Committee, the Public Health Committee, the Judiciary Committee, Legislative Management, and I'm chair of the Screening Committee, which reviews all the legislation that goes to the House floor. In my tenure, I've been instrumental in working on the state budget, and I continue to work in a bipartisan fashion. We've had our first bipartisan budget in the last 10 years passed out of Hartford, and I was very proud to be one of those members who had worked on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sowney.
My name is Colin Sowney. Thank you very much again, League of Women Voters, for having us. Thank you, everybody, for offering me the privilege of addressing you. I'm not the 12-year incumbent looking for my 7th term. I'm not even a lawyer. I'm a hard-working man from Guilford, Connecticut. I was born and raised in Guilford, Connecticut. I've worked across the vocations from all the way from construction. I've owned a package store. I've worked in the tool and die industry. I spent a long time working very hard to try to get ahead. What I'm tired of is working very hard and not getting ahead due to what I see as corporate welfare in the state of Connecticut when we have bickering from the two parties not coming together. I'm running third party for the Greens. I plan on coming together with both parties and adopting ideas that offer the best opportunities for the people in the state of Connecticut to move forward. I don't think we have an opportunity like we do now to change the status quo in Connecticut, and thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you. The first question, we'll start with Mr. Mace. The state's current budget deficit has been reported variously from $600 million to $1 billion. What do you think it amounts to, and what would you recommend be done about it?
Well, I think we're probably closer to the $1 billion deficit. What we have to do is we have to start coming in with job growth. In order for the state to start having revenue, we have to work with the businesses of Connecticut. We have to be able to afford tax incentives so that businesses could hire people, so people could do work productions, so we can get more things on the shelves within the state of Connecticut. Hiring more people will bring in more state income tax, bring in more sales tax revenue, and by affording businesses an opportunity to do that and help Connecticut grow, that's what we have to do. We've lost a couple 100,000 jobs over the past 12 years, and we haven't gotten a majority of that back. We have to start getting jobs back into Connecticut in order for our state to grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Candelora?
I think the budget deficit is probably about $1.6 billion per year. We have a biennium budget. It's about pushing $4 billion. And I think that certainly job growth is important for us to continue. The talk of taxes and tolls concerns me because I think it's going to stagnate our job growth. And what we saw in the last biennium budget that I helped craft, we actually reduced taxes on trusts and estates. We reduced the tax on seniors' Social Security and pensions. And what we're actually finding is that revenue is increasing because of it. We're seeing $50 million more of revenue in our trust and estate dollars because of the reductions in taxes. So Connecticut needs to find its sweet spot again on taxation by looking at areas that we could lower taxes to become more competitive. And then on the same hand, we do have opportunities to provide savings. For instance, we provide health services in a dual fashion. Nonprofits, as well as the public sector, government, provide certain healthcare services. The nonprofits are much more efficient in providing the services. Some services cost $1 million per patient when administered by the state of Connecticut. It can be done for a third of the cost through nonprofits. So we're one of only 4 states that does this. We need to begin to eliminate that. So I think there's still areas that we could find efficiencies in the state of Connecticut without actually cutting services. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley?
The state budget and the balance of the budget, as well as the deficit, seems to be, to me, one of those dividing issues that the two parties always find things to argue about. Balancing the state budget should consist of a few basic things: curbing expenses and limiting the spending involved in politics today, reducing corporate welfare. Companies like Amazon, eBay, Etsy, Walmart, all of these companies have robbed our small businesses of their income. The 25-year decrease in local economy will prove that. In order to balance our state's budget, we need to introduce several small pieces of legislation to help increase the income and decrease spending. Tolls are not the answer. They never were the answer. I can't believe we're still discussing tolls here in the state of Connecticut. I thought we got rid of them years ago, and they're coming up again. Here we are again talking about tolls. How unsafe do they need to be? Legalization of marijuana here in the state of Connecticut, when we have Canada, the entire country, gone legal, and when we have Massachusetts, the entire state going legal, absolutely needs to be reviewed as a source of income to help balance the state budget, as well as sports gambling. We already currently have in the state of Connecticut, the Connecticut Lottery and our partners with the Indians. There is no reason why we should not be adopting gambling legislation to help solve the state budget and allowing some of our in-state partners to take advantage of the federal legislation that allows sports gambling. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone like an extra 30 seconds?
Yes, I will.
Mr. Mace?
I'd like to say, be wary when candidates say that they're going to cut taxes. And also, it's a term and it's a campaign slogan to get votes. And it doesn't always happen as easy as somebody saying it. And as far as tolls, I've taken the middle-of-the-road decision on tolls. I want to see what the $10 million study that has been proposed and what it's going to bring to Connecticut. We have over 300 bridges that need to be repaired or replaced. And you know what? How are we going to do that when we're cutting taxes and we need literally hundreds of millions of dollars to do that? Thank you.
Mr. Candelora?
The need for tolls because we're running out of money is a false narrative. The state of Connecticut has overspent its transportation funds. We continue to subsidize projects. So when we put capital into the projects, we then have to subsidize the operation of those projects. The state of Connecticut did not need a $10 million toll study because, in fact, under Governor Rell, we have a 400-page comprehensive toll study that was already completed. And I've actually read that entire document. And it leads me to conclude that before we even have a conversation about tolls, we actually need to look at a transit authority that would plan long-term, not short-term, but over 10 years in order to better provide appropriate funding for our transportation. Thank you.
Mr. Stanley?
Well, regarding tolls, if that's where we're going on, we already collect in the state of Connecticut a certain amount of funds from local business owners throughout the Northeast and throughout the country through the International Fuel Tax Association. And if we are going to start looking at our transportation fund as having a deficit, which Mr. Candelora just clearly said there really isn't, it's an overspending issue, then why wouldn't we take our 23-cent current fuel tax and maybe add 3 cents to that, solving an incredible deficit and taking advantage of a price swing that is quite frankly less than what you experience from a Monday to a Friday? I'm done.
All right, thank you. The next question is, would you suggest altering the Connecticut income tax, the estate tax, or the corporate tax rate? Mr. Candelora, you begin.
Sure. I think what we saw, as I pointed out, in the last biennium budget, when we got into the room with Democrats, what had happened was we had an impasse. The Democrats couldn't get enough votes to pass a budget on their own. They needed Republicans. And I was one of 8 people that went into the room and sat down and had conversation. And through that conversation, we did talk about taxes, because over the past 8 years, we've had tax increase after tax increase after tax increase. In fact, we've lost, despite increasing the income tax on certain individuals by 1%, we still lost over $3.6 billion in projected income tax revenue. Why? Because people left the state of Connecticut who are wealthy. And so when we went into the room, we had a conversation about, are we overtaxed, and are there areas that we could reduce taxation and increase our revenues? And so in a bipartisan fashion, we agreed to reduce the trust and estate tax, for one. That's already showing an increase in revenue of $50 million. We actually decreased the sales tax on boats because we found that the boating industry was suffering because they were moving their boats to Rhode Island and to New York. And what in fact happened, just since July 1st, we saw a 44% increase in boat sales. So I think we need to have those conversations. Tax revenue doesn't get generated just by increasing taxes. You can, in fact, lower taxes and increase your revenue. And we proved it in this last biennium budget. And I think that's where our conversation needs to be this next session.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley?
So you asked about income tax, estate tax, and corporate tax. Right now, well, I'm a fresh politician. I'm looking to get into lawmaking. I'm not exactly sure how our corporate tax subsidies work and how we offer people benefits when they do pay a large amount of tax, what we kick back to them. I don't understand how this works. I do know that there's a problem that exists there that needs to be reviewed. In the state of Connecticut, we just all suffered through a property tax increase because of what, in my opinion, is, again, overspending, removing the subsidies that are coming from our towns, increasing our property taxes, which should never happen. I can't believe we live in the state of Connecticut and we're looking at a property tax increase. Estate tax, income tax, corporate taxes. If people are making money in the state of Connecticut, they need to be paying to the state of Connecticut to help support the resources, which are the people and the products we produce here in the state of Connecticut. It's very important that we also see social equity as being an important revenue earner, and nobody is ever discussing that. Thank you.
Mr. Mason?
Thank you. Well, it's certainly hard for a candidate that's a challenger to challenge what Mr. Candelora said happened in a room, because nobody here was in that room to find out exactly what was discussed. That being said, I don't think that the taxes, the Connecticut tax, the estate tax, and the sales tax is such a dilemma, because what's happening is the state income tax makes up for more than 50% of our budget of $20 billion. And what we need to do is we need to be able to put state employees, other employees to work so that we can grow the revenue from the income tax. Having employees pay more for their benefits and more for other expenses, that gives them less buying power. So yeah, people are moving out of the state, but also people are losing their purchasing power, and as they lose their purchasing power, then we lose on the state the sales tax, and that's part of the dilemma as well. Thank you.
Any 30-second rebuttal? All right. A question from this evening's audience. Knowing that Connecticut has one of the highest rates of income inequality in the nation, what policies would you support at the state level to address this, Mr. Sowney?
Thank you very much. Income inequality in Connecticut is, actually, we are in Connecticut, one of the litmus tests for the entire nation. In my opinion, when you have a minimum wage that is quite honestly equal to poverty, and you have people in your state that are members of the Fortune 500 club, you have a huge inequality in income. And unfortunately, unless we can figure out a way to, again, increase local economy and bring that local commerce up to a capacity that is able to support the entirety of its own society, you're never going to be able to solve any of these problems. For long-term stability, you need to be able to get rid of some of these corporations and start focusing again on small business and their economy, the employees they keep, the amount they pay their employees. If we increase the minimum wage, we've now just allowed the lowest level earners to spend more money within their community. And when people are spending money in their community, it's quite clear that everybody is earning. The business owner is earning. The people are earning because it comes back down. That business owner wants to go to the store. People who go out and have a good time at the bar, people who go out and have a good time at the sportsplex, wherever they're going, they need money to spend there. And if we continue to watch this money disappear out of our state, these people are never going to have money to spend again. And we really need to fight against this long-term attack on local small economy by increasing the minimum wage and allowing our bottom earners to get a little bit more piece of the pie so that we can all benefit from their spending. Thank you.
Mr. Mason?
I come from a union background, nearly 45 years in the union. And one of the things I love about the unions is there is no wage inequality. Contract is set. It doesn't matter what your gender is, doesn't matter what your race is. Everybody gets paid accordingly. It's equal. And companies that are near a union, that are not union, they increased the wages for their employees as well because they don't want to lose their employees to go into a shop where there's a union shop. Now, in Connecticut, we need to start advancing with manufacturing. We need to start working the girls and boys, the children for the future to start taking over for Connecticut, and that's in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. We should be having the girls and boys in the high schools being trained in the manufacturing. And as they get trained or they get sponsored by a company or to become an apprentice, it helps them so that they have good earned wages. And it's true. You can't expect a family to live on $10.10 an hour. Impossible. But the problem with that is we can't just all of a sudden say everybody's going to get $15 an hour right off the bat because that would hurt the small businesses and other businesses. But I think with the men and women to have equality, we should definitely strive for the future to make sure that the jobs that they get into are equally paid. Thank you.
Mr. Candelora?
I think income inequality has been a big issue, and I think where it really starts is with education with our children. And one of the things that the state of Connecticut has done finally is implemented an education cost-sharing formula, which is the education dollars that go to our towns and cities. And it's actually based on a true income formula, so that communities that have less money have second language learners, have free and reduced lunch, receive additional state aid for these children. I think the other challenge that we have is making sure that these individuals are receiving proper health care. So Connecticut has instituted school-based healthcare clinics. So families that don't have support services, don't have resources, could receive wraparound services in the school districts. And I think that's something we need to continue to advance in order for in particular our city children, to better their lives. And in terms of the education piece, we certainly do. We've had a great focus on UConn and our higher education, and we need to begin focusing on our middle management, our middle tiered manufacturing companies. So one of the things a lot of our schools are doing, Wallingford is advanced in this, and North Branford's begun doing it as a capstone program, where children are going into the community and working with businesses to find out what kind of trade they might like to do. My son took advantage of it in North Branford and realized that mechanical engineering was not the field that he wanted to go into. So it gives them options to be able to advance themselves. But I do think our cities, we need to continue to really focus on the education dollars that are going there and making sure that they have appropriate wraparound services. Because if they continue to drain resources, it ends up hurting our towns as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments you want to add?
Yes. The issue was just brought up about state aid and to the school bases and these children from the inner city that need the state aid. And it begs the question, how can we have a campaign slogan, we're going to cut taxes? Because every time you cut taxes, you wind up cutting aid to somebody. So how can we sit here and promoting aid and helping these children and at the same time saying we're going to cut taxes? It's a conflict. It's a contradiction. We can't do that. And we have to work with the trade schools. They are the next generation. They are the next generation to take over the state, and we have to be able to put them to work in good paying jobs. Thank you.
Mr. Sally?
I'd just like to say that I don't think there's a single person in this room or at this table who honestly can sit here and say that children aren't the most important thing coming into our future and for our future. They are going to be the people that are going to be taking care of us. I'm a 44-year-old man. I already know that there's going to be young people taking care of me when I get old. Again, I don't think that there's a single one of us who doesn't think that the children right now are the single most important thing as we go into the future and looking at how we're going to protect them. I firmly believe we need to educate our children on all of the social issues. I think that they've been missing the boat on a bunch of stuff, and when they graduate and go off into the world, it is part of the problem that they're experiencing that we see in society today. I wasn't sure if there was a question. I just wanted to touch off on what was said about the children.
Mr. Candelora?
I just want to, I guess, reemphasize that there's not a negative correlation between reducing taxes and also increasing spending. What I had pointed out again is that we had reduced taxes in our last budget and saw increases of revenue. And in fact, in our last budget, we were able to increase education dollars at the same time making cuts elsewhere. And so what I'm talking about really is prioritization, not just a slash and burn mentality. And I think we need to take a more of a careful, balanced approach when we are budgeting. That's why, frankly, the last budget that Connecticut passed, it took us 7 months of being in a room in order to draft, because we were carefully making those cuts.
Thank you. Next question to Mr. Mace first. Would you eliminate any state mandates in order to save the state money?
Well, that's
Save us money.
any state mandates. The truth is, I don't know which mandates we would be talking about that would be eliminated. We can't eliminate the state income tax. We can't eliminate the sales tax. To my recollection, there isn't anything that I could think of that I would be able to eliminate in order to keep the state moving forward.
Okay.
Sorry.
Mr. Candelora?
Well, the state of Connecticut has hundreds and hundreds of mandates that we push down onto our communities. And I do think we always should be mindful of how can we streamline our services and make it more appropriate. I mean, right now we have a Department of Public Health that provides licensing, for instance, for day camps. And then we have our local East Shore Department of Health that also does licensing at those same facilities. We should be streamlining those mandates into one department as opposed to businesses being, henpecked by multiple different agencies every time they want to try to do something. The state of Connecticut doesn't do a good job of that. I do think in areas where we've done well on, one mandate that we champion, it's a minor one, but allowing for volunteers to go on athletic fields and prep them before a game. North Branford, our Public Works Department, has been very good about working cooperatively with our towns. But there are some communities where you can't even go onto the field and fix up a field for a baseball game because the town prohibits it. The unions will prohibit that from happening. So the state of Connecticut, we passed a law that said if volunteers want to go into your community and clean up a park or clean up a ball field, they're able to do that. That takes some pressure off the towns. It seems minor, but it certainly does help. The other areas that we do have to look at is education, especially in our regional school districts. In the town of Durham, which I currently represent, being in a regional school district, they cannot reduce their budget at times when they need to, because the regional school district trumps what the local authority can do. And so you often find towns pitted against each other and fighting, versus like North Branford that has a single school district, a budget is passed, and the town and Board of Ed can work together cooperatively on their budgets. For regional districts, they don't have that opportunity. So I think there are many different areas that we could always continue to look at in the state of Connecticut to reduce our unfunded mandates. Another one we did was prevailing wage on construction projects. We saved thousands of dollars for our communities by eliminating that requirement on certain projects. Thank you.
Mr. Sony,
Can you repeat the question, please?
would you eliminate any state mandates in order to save money?
I think that's an important question, and as Mr. Candelora had just said, there are hundreds, probably even thousands of mandates that I think probably all need review, and if some of them are found to be against what the common public believes to be their best interests, then yeah, they should be absolutely removed. There are a few things that I've noticed. When you get a traffic ticket, you have to give a donation to the traumatic brain industry, or for TBI, some research company, for a ticket that you've just received for speeding. It's one of those things that I'm referring to when we go into reviewing exactly where all this money is being paid to. There are a lot of things, and I'm sure that they exist within a lot of these mandates, where we can start to pick out little pieces. Maybe the whole mandate doesn't need to be replaced, but small pieces of it probably need to be revised so that we can start looking at how we're going to save the people in Connecticut money, and again, divert those funds over to education and healthcare. In Connecticut, you can't ignore education. The children are number one. Any state mandates, number one, that don't keep our children forthright, they should definitely be reviewed for who they are benefiting. I can personally, through books that I've read, understand that there are probably hundreds of these mandates that do nothing but benefit contractors in the state and fill their pockets. That's not the way we should be doing business in the state. We should be benefiting our resources, which are the people in the state and the products they produce. Thank you.
30-second rebuttal, Mr. Mace?
Yes. Like I said, it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly which mandate should be eliminated. But as one of the respondents was, having volunteers go onto an athletic field, first of all, that constitutes outsourcing or taking away somebody's job. And what happens if that volunteer's out on that field and gets hurt? Who's liable for that there? So that exposes the towns to being sued because they're a volunteer. Doesn't make it any better. Regionalization, that seems to be the wave of the future, and that seems to be where we're heading. I don't think it's time yet to start doing regionalization by taking different municipal organizations and merging them together to try and save money. I don't think it's time yet. So that's my response. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kendall. Any more? Okay, Mr. Sowney? Okay.
I'm also, thank you very much.
Can you suggest ways that you haven't already mentioned to increase state revenue? And if you want to include the installation of tolls on our highways, how would those revenues be used? Mr. Candelora.
So I guess as a Republican, that's a scary question to answer. But I do think there are opportunities. I mean, one that was referred to is sports betting. That is an area that's coming to Connecticut. It's been legalized by the United States Supreme Court, and it's something we are going to need to regulate. And there's an opportunity there for revenue. But we need to be very careful of how we implement that policy. As an example, when we implemented Keno a few years ago, we negotiated with the casino tribes, and the governor gave them 25% of the Keno revenue for basically not doing anything, just showing up. And those revenues are projected to go into the hundreds of millions of dollars that eventually in that deal, we're going to be paying the casino, the tribe's money, as opposed to them paying us money. So when we do go forward on these policies, I think we need to tread very carefully and adopt them appropriately. The other area is the online gaming, where the casinos do want to begin to implement that. And that's something we got to look at and potentially regulate. But I do still think the state of Connecticut is overtaxed generally. And I think we've lost, as I would say, we lost our sweet spot in taxation. And we need to look at some areas where we could reduce taxation and increase our revenue. And I think one of those areas certainly is the income tax. But that is something we need to gauge very carefully. As I said, the trust and estate tax is bringing in about $50 million of more money. And the corporate tax right now, that structure is at 10%. And that's something that we're going to have to examine again. The corporate taxes, I think, are a little bit more forgivable because it's taxing income that's earned versus taxing somebody regardless of whether they're making money. So it's something going forward that I think Republicans have shown a willingness to have the conversation, and I would continue that conversation if reelected. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley.
So we're discussing how to increase revenues to the state. Vincent just mentioned online gambling, and it's very important that we protect the children. Again, if we're going to be increasing our income through online gambling, and again, I support legalization of marijuana for income. And if we are going to be using these income sources to help our state earn money, we must 100% put together a program that educates our children about these things we're about to regulate, whether it be gambling, drugs, even the pharmaceutical industry at this point should probably be involved in educating our children so that when they graduate, they have a chance. The state deficit and increasing income into the state through sports betting is a great idea. Through legalization of marijuana is a great idea. We can do plenty of things, from adding a deposit on styrofoam, plastic bags. We can do all of these things. But one thing those things are never going to do is stop the corporate attack on our state funds. Once you start bringing more money into the state, you're just going to make it more enticing for these corporations to come in and find more money to steal from us. We need to stop the robbery that's happening in the state of Connecticut by these corporations, whether it be Walmart, eBay, Etsy, Amazon. These corporations, I don't know what to call them, but we're going to call it internet commerce at this point. Internet commerce is the #1 enemy of small business, of any business in America, and especially in small towns today. If you cannot understand the importance that online sales has at the detriment of your small businesses, then unfortunately you're never going to go into the future with legislation that helps to reduce the amount of money that these online retailers and gamblers are going to be taking out of our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mason.
Thank you. One of the ways we have to increase revenue in the state is the shoreline. The Connecticut coast, from the New York border to Rhode Island border, has not been used by the state of Connecticut the way it should be. We should be working with those small businesses, getting hotels, getting small franchises into the shoreline so that when people come through Connecticut, they want to stay overnight. We've had promises that that's going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. That's one of the things I would like to propose is we have to start working with the shoreline towns along the borders so that we could definitely have people. Tourism is a big thing. It's funny, Connecticut doesn't have an ad in New York or Massachusetts or Rhode Island, but other states have an ad for us to visit them. That's one of the ways to raise revenue. I also talked about the advanced manufacturing to put people to work. Let's talk about land. The state of Connecticut owns thousands of pieces of property, and they're not on the tax rolls. And some of it is prime property. A study was made, and the recommendation was that Connecticut should start doing something with this property. Sell it, become a landlord, do something with it, so that it can start being on the tax rolls and start bringing revenue into the state of Connecticut. Casinos. I don't understand why the two Indian tribes have a monopoly in this state and we can't break it, because if we're going to go the way of gambling, then we should be able to have other casinos come into the state of Connecticut and help us. Transportation. We have to start focusing on transportation to improve our transportation in Connecticut, another airport, so that we could start having other people coming in, other companies coming in to land in either New Haven, Bridgeport, or Sikorsky's. Here's the one contradiction that really bothers me. We sit up here and we say, we want more gambling, we want sports betting, we want people to pay $200, $300, $400 to go to a gambling casino, but we don't want to have them pay 1 penny in taxes. How does that make sense? People can go gamble away their paycheck. We don't care because we're going to get something out of it, but we don't want to have that person raise 1 cent towards taxes. That's the dichotomy that bothers me. Thank you.
Additional, Mr. Candelara?
Yeah, I think Mr. Suni made a great point about the internet sales, and certainly in my business, I saw we had a retail store that was eliminated because of the internet, and it's something that as a state we've been trying to grapple with. Fortunately, Amazon put a brick and mortar building in the state of Connecticut, which enabled us to be able to collect sales tax from Amazon. But it is something that is it's a federal issue that we need to try to get the federal government to take action, or at least our U.S. Supreme Court, to recognize the state's ability to implement a sales tax, because I do agree wholeheartedly. The internet has put such a detrimental impact on our brick and mortar small businesses in the state of Connecticut. And if we were able to capture the internet sales, we could certainly increase a lot of revenue.
Mr. Sani, additional comment?
I'd just like to add, unfortunately, I'm an internet retailer. I'm one of those people that I want to tax. I sell on eBay. I'm well aware. I sell actually used old product. I'm a ham radio operator. It's old vintage ham radio equipment. I fix it and sell it on eBay. It's no big deal. But anyways, I'm not robbing from the local retailers through this business. But as an online retailer, right now, any business that sells in Connecticut over $1 million of product and ships it into our state is paying sales tax. That's got to change to like $250,000. If you're going to sell in our state, which actually moves it from like 40 retailers in the state of Connecticut from outside sources to almost over 300. $250,000 or more in the state of Connecticut, you should be paying sales tax. And I think that's a federal law. I'm not sure if that's a state law that would require it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mace, any
No,
more?
nothing further.
Okay. Well, you've led into the next question in a way. There will be 2 questions on our November ballot to amend our state constitution. The first would preserve the Special Transportation Fund, require it to be used exclusively for transportation purposes, and require transportation revenues be put into a lockbox. Do you support this? Mr. Sani first.
I can make this quick. I don't see anything wrong with it. I'll be honest with you. I'm not educated well enough on this subject right now, but if you have to put funds that are designated for something in a lockbox account so that they don't get designated to something else, there's probably a core issue at the beginning with why those funds aren't going to the place they're originally designated to first. That needs to be reviewed, not a correction in the afterwards. And I'm sorry, I don't understand enough about it.
Mr. Mace.
Yes, I support a lockbox. It is imperative that we have a lockbox. The state of Connecticut over the past 40 years has not kept up the roads and bridges in the state of Connecticut. We need a mandate so that there is money and revenue. Currently, there are approximately 300 bridges that need attention, and we don't have the money to do that. And there are proposals that next year we'll give the transportation $30 million, and then the year after we'll give them $70 million, and then the year after we'll give them $150 million. The bottom line is, where are we going to get this money if we're going to decrease taxes? We have to have a lockbox so that in order for our roads to be safe, drive around some of the highways, drive underneath some of the bridges. When you see all of the rust and the corrosion, I know I get a little bit nervous, especially if I'm at a traffic light and I'm stuck underneath that bridge. And I just got that eerie feeling that one of those things are going to collapse on me. So I get a little nervous. We have to be able to say, yes, a lockbox so that whoever is the governor, who's ever in the legislature cannot touch that money to put into the general revenue. The general ledger, it has to go to repairing our roads and bridges and keeping the public safety. Bridges and roads are safety. We heard about what happened with the Mianas River Bridge years ago. We don't want something like that to happen again. And in order to prevent that, we have to have the state and our employees being able to go out and repair them and keep them up to date. Thank you very much.
Mr. Candelara.
So I do support the transportation lockbox. I think there are some issues with it, but we can't let the perfect get in the way of the good. And I think the legislation is good. The problem with the legislation is that the money gets locked when it gets put into it, not beforehand. So for instance, the gas tax that's collected is supposed to go to the transportation fund. What this lockbox will say is, once you put it in there, then you can't rate it. However, you have to put it in there first. And that's part of the problem, because the legislature in the past has rated that fund. I have never voted for a budget to sweep any of those funds. I remember when that lockbox was being voted on and proposed to be on our ballot, the Democrats, right after that vote, swept $30 million out of the transportation fund. It was the biggest hypocrisy. It can continue to be swept. But having said that, I think it is important. It's a first step to make sure that those transportation dollars are secured. The second ballot question is the manner in which the state disposes of its...
That's our next question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So we'll go one.
That's all right.
Okay. So I'll wait on that question. But anyway, I do support the transportation lockbox. I think that we should try to refine it and make it tighter if it comes back to us and we can statutorily change it to make sure that every fund that is devoted for transportation dollars automatically gets put into that box. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments on this, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, I'm glad that Mr. Candelora and I finally agree on something. Thank you.
Anything additional? Okay. The next question does have to do with question number 2 on the ballot for November 6th. It would require the legislature to hold a public hearing prior to the transfer of state-owned property, and their approval is required by a 2/3 vote of each chamber of the General Assembly. Do you support this?
No, I do not.
Okay. That's all.
Holding public hearings would slow down the process. Right now, government is at a snail's pace as it is. And in order for the government to actually move forward and get good production and raise revenue and things of that nature, we have to be able to let the legislatures do their job. And holding public hearings, and then another public hearing, then maybe another public hearing, slows down the process. And a lot of times, the people who go to the public hearings are people who are lobbyists, and the public doesn't really attend those. And if the public hearings are held up at the Capitol and they're held during the day, well, most of the people are working, and other people are paid to go up there and try and persuade the legislature to do that. So I would not be in support of holding public hearings for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
So I actually emphatically support this legislation, and I'll tell you where it came out of, is when we were serving years ago, there was some property in Haddam by the Goodspeed Opera House that in the dark of the night, there was an amendment put on a bill, and that property was transferred to a private entity, unbeknownst to everybody that was voting on that legislation. It didn't get a public hearing through the committee process, and of course, it was considered a gem of the Connecticut River, and it upset a lot of environmentalists. And as a result of that, the legislature said, you know what, we cannot have, a lot of time there could be what's called rats slipped into bills, where somebody would, amend a bill at the last minute and you don't realize what's being slipped into it. And for somebody to abuse their position in that manner is just unacceptable. And so what this constitutional amendment would do is say that when you're going to transfer land in the state of Connecticut, there has to be a public hearing. Under our rules in both chambers, that exists anyway. Technically, you're supposed to have a public hearing before you do any legislation. And so once that public hearing occurs, the law would go through and it would have to pass by 2/3 instead of a simple majority. Because if we're going to seek to dispose of state assets, sometimes without paying a dime, which in this situation that was going to happen, it was just going to be a land swap, it needs to be open and notorious, and the public needs to know about it. So I certainly do 100% support that constitutional amendment, and I hope everyone does as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sally.
I'm Green Party. I'll be honest with everybody here. I don't support any sell-off of the properties in the state of Connecticut. I think there's plenty of ways we can earn income off of them. And I think that anybody that supports legislation that would streamline or speed up the sell-off of property in the state of Connecticut may want to be reviewed as possibly having a hand in maybe making some money on the situation. I think that anytime we get rid of any property in the state of Connecticut, I'm a fiscally conservative person. I think that our property should be used as a way of either earning income, supporting the environment, or protecting the environment. And if that means we have to put on maybe some solar panels, I'm not too sure about wind right now, but there's a few things that I think with our land in the state of Connecticut, there should be zero sell-off, and I fully support any legislation that stalls the selling off of land in the state of Connecticut right now.
Thank you. Additional comments?
Yes. There was a study done earlier this year, study by the state of Connecticut. They had a private company do the study, and they addressed the land issue. And with the amount of property that Connecticut owns, the recommendation was to get this land developed, get it to a board of realtors, and then start moving the land so that it would raise revenue and put them on the tax rolls. And if we have to have a public hearing every time something was going to happen for land for the state of Connecticut, it would just be a waste of time and obviously a lot of effort and a waste of money. So I would disagree with supporting the amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Keller?
Yeah, I just want to just respond and to let people sort of let this sink in. But the thought that under current law, the state of Connecticut could say transfer the asset of Hammonasset State Beach without a public hearing and with an amendment and a simple majority vote of both chambers is pretty frightening. And that's the way the current law is set up. And going through the process and seeing that actually did happen. There was land transferred that we didn't realize was getting transferred. Unfortunately, we are able to undo it. That's really what we're talking about here, is protecting Connecticut's resources, protecting its assets. If we're looking at property to develop as a state, certainly that might be appropriate. But a one-day public hearing, I think, warrants it to protect our assets.
Thank you. Mr. Sowney? Okay. Move on. Mr. Candelora, first on this one. 34 states plus the District of Columbia now permit some form of no-excuse early voting, and 3 more states conduct elections exclusively by mail. Would you support these or other ways of enabling the maximum participation of eligible voters in an election?
I think first what Connecticut needs to do is, I'm generally apprehensive right now supporting early voting, because what we're seeing right now, if you talk to your registrars, they complain to us that they want us to get rid of same-day registration, the EDC voting. It has put such a burden on them, especially our small towns, when you talk about mandates, versus the value of how many people actually come in and vote. It's a lot of manpower, it's a lot of confusion and aggravation. And the state of Connecticut, our Secretary of State just implemented the motor voter policy, and we're now still seeing issues with that. People are being taken off voter rolls. People are being taken out of party registration just because they happen to renew their license. So Connecticut really needs to take a step back and do an inventory before we continue to begin to tinker with the voting laws, because I think there really is a problem there with the motor voter registration laws. And the reason I say that is because it's not good for the democratic process when people think that it's rigged or there was fraud that occurred. It's not good for either side, whether you're Republican or Democrat, to have to try to defend that. There was just an article the other day, and I think it was the 2 Greenwich registrars, Democrat and Republican, wrote a letter to the state complaining about this motor voter registration and calling for an immediate suspension of the process. So I think before we take another leap, we've got to peel it back and make sure that there's full integrity in our voting process so that we don't have a disenfranchise of all the voters. Thank you.
Mr. Stanley.
Again, this is one of those subjects I'm not fully educated on, but I would like to say that I do think it's important that anybody who is a resident and citizen here in Connecticut over 18 should absolutely have the ability to vote. I do understand the problem with same-day voting. How do you register somebody the same day? It's just very, very difficult. I also understand the inherent problems with the DMV. As visiting the DMV several times, I know that there is some serious, once again, internet or information streamlining that needs to be done. I myself was switched parties through some sort of erroneous problem back during the 2016 election and they said it was a DMV issue. This has happened to plenty of people throughout not only Connecticut, but everywhere else. If indeed a view at the information has to be reviewed, then that should be the case. But again, I do believe that anybody over 18 who is a resident and citizen who registers within a timely fashion should be able to vote in the state of Connecticut and should be able to be welcomed to vote. We should be giving these people rides. We should be helping them with whatever they can do to get to the polls and vote. They are the constituents. They are the important people. They are the ones that we should be listening to. Thank you.
Mr. Mason?
Yes, I wouldn't support early voting. However, I do support voting by mail. Part of the democratic process is to get as many people to vote as possible. And there are a lot of times when people either work late or can't get out, that voting by mail would certainly help them, and there'd probably be more people voting. Also, it gives people an opportunity, absence early voting, to listen to candidates like us up here, to meet with you and listen to our positions so that you have more of an educated guess and situation where you can judge us and decide how you're going to vote. So I think as the mechanics work out, mail voting would definitely be more democratic, but early voting I would be against. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Candelora, any more comments? Anyone else comment? Okay. Next question to Mr. Sowney first. Do you support any changes to Connecticut's current gun legislation, such as restrictions on ownership?
The only changes I support to any gun legislation is supporting any mental health background checks that we can perform before we allow people to be in possession of guns. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mason?
Well, I support the Connecticut gun laws and restrictions as they are. Hear it often enough where Connecticut has the strictest gun laws in place, and there's a reason for that, and it should be. Checking backgrounds and vetting people to make sure that they're qualified, and certainly we need a lot of help in the mental aspect of it, guns getting into the wrong hands. Other things we have to worry about is bump stocks and, why is there a need? Look, I respect the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment gives people the right to bear arms. But also, when that Second Amendment was drafted, it was because people's livelihoods depended on it. Having AKA assault rifles today as a weapon in your house really isn't a necessity as far as I'm concerned, and having bump stocks to change guns so that they have rapid fire. And now we have to worry about these ghost guns that people are being able to get on the internet. So I think our laws are strict enough, and I wouldn't change it. I certainly wouldn't relax any of the laws. And I think we also need, especially, we talk about school and protecting our children in school. I do not agree with having teachers or principals or administrators having to carry guns. However, I do support, and I'm on the North Branford Board of Ed, I do support our guards who protect our children every day to have guns. They are retired police officers. Their career, they get trained at the police academy again. We have strict background checks on them, and you can't tell that they are carrying a gun, but you know what? They're there to protect our children. We do not want our children going to school worrying about some catastrophe happening. And parents shouldn't be worried about that as well. So as long as that we're protecting our children and we have the gun laws, I think that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Candelora?
I think one of the areas that we need to look at in the state of Connecticut is the enforcement of our gun laws. We have the most restrictive gun laws in the state of Connecticut, or in the country, but we enforce almost none of them. I think over 90% of the people that are arrested for gun violations don't get convicted. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that we have these laws on the books and we're not enforcing them. And I think we need to look at the penalties and analyze why people who are committing crimes with our gun laws aren't being convicted. Because that conviction would lead to that person having their gun taken away. And so that's the first thing that I certainly would do, is an inventory of our current laws and why the judicial branch isn't enforcing those laws. I was proud to actually be the author of legislation that allowed for the armed guards in schools. North Branford is actually, I think, the only school district in the state of Connecticut that has armed guards. But one of my concerns when they were implementing it, I think Enfield was one of them, and they removed their guards since then. But one of my concerns when they implemented it was making sure that we had appropriately trained officers, because studies show the minute you bring a gun into a school, even for security, there is a risk to our children. And so we authored legislation that required it be a police officer or a retired officer, and they have special post-certification in dealing with children in a school setting with the use of force. So I think, lastly, certainly, the ghost gun issue is something that's going to come up again probably next session. I think it's something that we need to take a look at. It's a fairly complicated issue because it is dealing with the manufacturing of a gun, which in most cases is illegal anyway. But it certainly is something with 3D printers and plastic guns that could potentially be produced that the state of Connecticut should take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional?
I would, first of all, just like to say thank you very much for implementing that legislation that brings armed officers and retired officers into schools with our children. I think that's an integral part of protecting our children. It's a fear tactic, but unfortunately it's a necessary one that will keep them safe. And I fully support it, and I agree with it, and thank you so much for introducing that. That was genius, and it should be done across the country. Ghost guns, I can go to the hardware store right now, buy a few pieces of pipe fitting, get a 12-gauge shotgun shell, and build a ghost gun. Most people don't understand how simple it is to build a gun. If we are going to be, once again, we have an internet problem, an information issue in the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mason?
Yes, you know, we have to respect, especially there's a lot of gun owners out there who are hunters, and they belong to these gun clubs where they go out and they hunt and everything else. And it's unfortunate that, you know, when the guns get into the wrong hands and the criminals are repeat offenders. And there is something to be said that we should definitely have stricter laws for those offenders by getting them off the streets and getting the guns out of their hands. Thank you.
Any more? Okay. Next question to Mr. Mace first. Do you think it is necessary to change Connecticut law to maintain or to improve access to health care, either now or if the Affordable Care Act gets repealed?
Well, healthcare is a big issue. It's a major issue. And if Obamacare gets repealed, a lot of residents, not only in Connecticut but across the country, are going to be in very difficult situations. What would happen is people will use the hospitals and the emergency rooms as their primary doctors, and eventually those monies are passed on to us. So the healthcare dilemma that, you know, we're seeing, especially, you know, among seniors, between Medicare and Medicaid is definitely something that we have to be able to protect. Too many seniors out there have to make a decision between buying their prescription drugs or buying food. And that's something where, you know, Medicare and Medicaid has to step in and make sure that our seniors are protected. And also, there are a lot of young children out there whose families can't afford health care. So there has to be something said so that people do have some kind of coverage in order to protect their children as well. So that was my opinion on health care for now.
Thank you. Mr. Candelora?
I think about 95% of Connecticut residents right now are on health care. Connecticut does a pretty good job of it. And so we hear about, on a national level, I guess it's one of the big issues on the national level. I don't think it's as big of an issue in the state of Connecticut because Connecticut sort of led the charge on a lot of the healthcare policies that are in place. So for instance, well before the Affordable Care Act was put in place, we extended healthcare to the age of 26. So if your child is in school, they'll still keep receiving their healthcare all the way through to the age of 26. We also addressed the issue of the pre-existing conditions, making sure that they carried over from policy to policy. All of those have been statutorily codified in the state of Connecticut. So if the Affordable Care Act does go away on the federal level, Connecticut wouldn't be impacted by it at all, that we're still protected. And I think that's good news for the state of Connecticut, for all the residents. And I think finally, you know, one of the issues that we fought, that we were able to reinstate, that our governor had wanted to cut, was the Medicare Savings Plan, which is sort of a plan that for seniors that fills in the prescription drugs, and it fills in that gap of where Medicare and Medicaid don't provide funding for your prescription drugs. We provide that in the state of Connecticut, and I was pleased to be part of that effort to restore that plan to make sure that our seniors don't lose their health insurance. So I think generally speaking, Connecticut is in a pretty good shape with healthcare, regardless of what happens on a federal level.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley?
Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, single-payer health care, Medicaid, Medicare, Husky. I'm not exactly sure what these definitions and terms mean for the differences in the types of health care that are available. Here's what I believe. I believe that every single human being should be offered the same minimum base health care. And if you happen to earn more money or happen to have a higher level of stature that you want better health care, you should be offered that opportunity through your insurance program that you pay independently for. I'm on Husky D. I'm a Medicaid patient, enrollee, however you may put it. I already well know the importance of national or state health care and how important it is for people who can't afford their own health care to be able to be covered and helped when they need it. We cannot be having people without coverage in the state of Connecticut. And I'm very excited to hear Mr. Candelora mention that about 95% of the people here are covered in the state of Connecticut. That is a great number. I want to see that number go to 100% of people in the state of Connecticut covered. And I want to make sure that the future costs of our coverage are not impeded by legislation. Here in the state of Connecticut and nationwide, we're suffering from healthcare insurance billing issues. Our insurance companies have completely robbed us again of our funds and our insurance money's funds. Our insurance rates are increasing exponentially, and it's due to the erroneous billing that the healthcare industry and the insurance industry have presented us with. Excuse me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything additional, Mr. Case?
Yes, I just want to say this here. The seniors, they helped build this country. From the era of the Great Depression all the way to today, they paid their dues, and we should not turn our backs on them. And that's why Connecticut has to make sure, with the Medicare Act and the Medicaid, that we're there for them because they've been there for us all of these decades. Thank you very much.
Mr. Candelora, anything else? Okay. Do you support paid family and medical leave? Why or why not? And we'll begin with Mr. Candelora.
Sure. So paid family medical leave, I think, has been an issue the state of Connecticut's been trying to deal with. Generally speaking, I support the notion of it, but it depends on what animal it does come in. The current proposal that has been pushed around is having 1% of everybody's income be taxed and that money go into a pool for people to be able to utilize paid family medical leave, but it's capped. And if you don't use the funds, you don't get your money back. I'm concerned with a policy like that because I think, again, it's another tax on individuals who may not be able to afford to pay in to begin with. One of the proposals I've pushed for is allowing for tax credits so that if a business will provide it, they would receive tax credits as a result. The other current proposal is for it to be state administered. It would cost the state of Connecticut about $18 million per year to administer. We don't have the funds to do that. So I would support having it be administered through a private nonprofit. Massachusetts has come forward. There's a company there that says they could administer it. But lastly, a lot of states that have paid family medical leave, they have a different structure for unemployment compensation insurance. Currently, under the state of Connecticut, businesses pay into the unemployment insurance. In those states that have family medical leave, the businesses don't pay the unemployment insurance. So I think if we're going to look at implementing a family medical leave, we do need to look at how it is funded and how, because if we're going to have businesses funded, we can't strap them with the unemployment compensation as well. But I think there could be an opportunity to look at rolling family medical leave into the uninsured compensation fund potentially. But the current proposal, I did not support, but I do support the other version that does have tax credits and makes it more voluntary for employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanley.
Paid family medical leave. When I was younger, people got supplementary insurance for this type of thing. And it seems now we're going into a world where society wants, the federal government or whether it be the state government to cover for these things. I don't think that our small businesses can handle much more burden after reading the studies that show their 25-year decrease in income. If we want, I agree with Vin here, if we want to implement family medical leave and pay them, pay everybody, men, women, whoever may be adversely affected, we have to find a way to earn revenue that actually benefits these people. When you leave work, you're a double-edged sword on that employer. So if that employer is required to pay for you to be there and you leave, now you are no longer there earning that employer money and he still has to pay. Unfortunately, that does not help the small business owner. It hurts the small business owner. We need to start implementing policies and legislation that helps the small business owner so that we can start watching our small business owners thrive here in the state of Connecticut and fight this 25-year decrease. I fully support paid family medical leave. I don't think anybody should be ever be left out in the cold. I do support finding a more effective way of funding it than trying to continue to tax our small business owners and people. I think large corporations in the state of Connecticut are more than capable of footing the bill for a lot of these issues that we're facing here in the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mason?
Yeah, I support paid family medical leave. You know, all too often, a sick worker has to decide whether to go into work sick or stay home and get paid. So if they don't get paid when they're staying home because they're sick, whatever illness they have, they go to work, and who knows, if they're taking medications or something and they're drowsy, they can cause an accident. Let's say it's a waiter or waitress serving you food and they sneeze on your food, or they shake your hand and they have a sickness, whatever. So no, we want those people to be able to say, no, I'm going to stay home, I'm going to get better, I'm going to take care of my family. Also, the family medical leave also protects, when there's a newborn child. Either the mother or the father could bond with the child and get time instead of leaving the child at a daycare or nursery right from day one in order to go to work and provide for their family. If I get to Hartford, I would work on issues such as this with the other side, with all the other legislators. We have to come up with a formula so that the workers in Connecticut are able to say, you know what, I'm sick, I have a chronic illness, I have to take care of a family member, I have to take care of a parent, I have to take care of a spouse, or if I have to take care of a child, or if I have to take care of myself. They should not have to make the decision that they're not going to get better, or their partners are not going to get better, or their family members are not going to get better because they have to go to work. So I support paid family medical leave. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comment? Okay. Mr. Sowney next. What steps can be taken to ensure that our businesses and our educated and skilled young people will remain in Connecticut?
Well, I'd like to just echo on what Mr. Mace was saying earlier about our manufacturing jobs here in the state of Connecticut. I grew up in many different vocations. I finished off at the tool and die industry. I've worked with a lot of people who were in a lot of different schools here in the state of Connecticut, and they grew up in vocational schools and that are now gone, whether it be machining, automotive, construction, framing, finish work, you name it, from flooring all the way up to ironworking. These vocations are dying off, and these are some of the best paid jobs. I have friends of mine who are line workers who make more money than close friends of mine who are lawyers. It's absolutely insane what the vocations are paying because we don't support them. In the state of Connecticut, if we want to start increasing small business funding by removing the subsidies we give big corporations so that these small businesses can hire more people, can start training people in the vocations. I'm a member of the Green Party. We're third party. I believe in the Green New Deal. This introduces solar power, hydroelectric power. It reduces nuclear energy. These are all very important things in our infrastructure that will create jobs, number one. It creates skilled jobs. Number two, you don't want to create just a job of somebody picking up and putting down. That's great. But fortunately, we are in America and we have skilled, intelligent employees who could be more than capable of installing solar panels and dealing with this infrastructure problem we currently have in the state of Connecticut. Creating income in the state of Connecticut is a big job, and there's a lot of things that need to be done. I have a lot of great ideas that are a little outside the box, but I guarantee that they are actually the ones necessary to make the change needed here in the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mays?
You know, during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was a big push by parents that their children had to go to college. First getting a high school education and then going to college so that they could provide for themselves in the future by getting good jobs. Well, today that no longer is true because not every child wants another 4-year education. There are students out there that are good with their hands and good with their minds in other ways than academia. We need the auto mechanics, we need the carpenters, we need the tradesmen, we need the manufacturers, we need the tool and dies, the machinists. These are people students that could benefit greatly in the state of Connecticut if we start working with our vocational and technical schools. It is imperative that they get educated through high school, but also they have to be able to work for the rest of their lives. And a lot of them don't want to get a job in an office or be an administrator. They're good with their hands. So I'm a firm believer that we have to be able to train and skill the next generation. Now, we want them to stay here in Connecticut. We want them to get trained, and we don't want them to take their skill to another state. So we have to be able to provide transportation for them. The days of taking your car and driving all over, you know, my generation, that's what we do. But these younger generations, they like the trains, buses, and airplanes. Connecticut has to be able to provide a transportation system so that they'll stay here, they'll get an apartment here, or they'll buy a house here, and then they'll use the public transportation to get to and from work. So I think that is one of the things that I would work on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Candelora?
So I think at the higher ed level, I was proud to be able to go to UConn and be participating in a ribbon cutting ceremony where the private sector donated $80 million into a building at UConn that provides for training for our students in high-tech engineering positions. They will be going off into the UTCs, Pratt & Whitney, Electric Boat. But I think the next level of training that we do need to look at, and the town of Wallingford, the school system in Wallingford has done a very good job of creating an educational hub where they have tied into the middle tier manufacturers. And these students are being trained at the high school level, connecting with these businesses out of high school, trying to match them up with jobs for those individuals that don't want to go to college. And I think that's a model that we need to take at a statewide level. And they're actually looking to implement that curriculum into other schools. And the last thing is we championed a proposal that was the House Republicans' concept. It was called the Learn Here, Live Here proposal, which would allow for a student that graduates from a Connecticut school, their income tax would go into a self-funding account, and that money could be used toward a down payment on a home for that individual, for a first-time home buyer. It's a way to keep our youth in the state of Connecticut and provide a savings mechanism for them to be able to purchase a home in Connecticut. And that fund would be revolving so that it would need an infusion. I think it's $10 million to start out, but then it funds itself as it goes, and people could utilize it. And I think that's something that sadly has not been implemented under this administration, but I think we should do it in order to help our youth be able to find a home, apartment, or condominium to live in once they find a job. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment?
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a startup company, and forgot what town it is in Connecticut, mid-Connecticut. It's called Hapco. And what they do is they make parts for the Blackhawks, for Sikorsky's. And there's companies like this here that are investing in the future with the students in the vocational schools. And I watched a video to see the computerized technology that these students have to go through. And it's also boys and girls that are studying this here and being trained in this area. So this is the type of skill that's going to be the wave of the future, and we have to make sure that the young generation can do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a
Mr.
quick
Candelora,
30
anything more?
seconds.
Okay. Mr. Mace first on the next. What is your position on raising our state's minimum wage?
I believe we have to raise the state minimum wage. And at some time in the future, we have to get to $15 an hour. Very hard for a family or even a single individual to live and support themselves on $10.10 an hour. You figure for a week's pay, it's $400. By the time they take out taxes, maybe $310, $320 that they take home, that's their purchasing power. That's roughly about $1,250 a month. If they have a rent, the rent's going to be anywhere from $800 to $1,100 a month. How are they supposed to survive? By buying food and clothing and other things for themselves. So, but we also have to be able to do it on a progressive level. And we have to do it so that smaller businesses and middle-sized businesses are not hurt by raising the minimum wage. So it's kind of a tough road to travel. It's damned if you do and damned if you don't. But the best way to travel is we have to grow the economy, and as we grow the economy and there are more jobs, and the economy begins to get better in the state of Connecticut, then we should start raising the minimum wage at a pace so that it keeps up with the growth of Connecticut. So I'm a firm believer that at some point in time, we should have minimum wage at $15 an hour so people could actually live and stay in Connecticut, because at $10 an hour, yeah, a lot of young kids will move out too to go to another state where it's a lot cheaper to live. So I'm in favor of raising it to $15 an hour. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Candelora.
I think we make a big mistake when we equate a minimum wage with a living wage. You know, of course, people can't survive on $10 an hour, but that's not the conversation we should be having. The problem with the increase in the minimum wage is we talk about wanting to keep our youth in Connecticut, but when we raise the minimum wage, guess who loses their jobs? It's the youth. We've witnessed it over the last 10 years. Youth employment is down in the state of Connecticut because if somebody has to pay an individual $15 an hour, they're going to look for a college-age person, or they're going to look for, an adult, somebody over, the age of 22, to take that job. And so there has to be a balancing act, and I think there has to be a more complex conversation. And I think that is why I think Democrats and Republicans in Hartford have not increased the minimum wage, because we've had this dialogue and there's an understanding we can't continue to do this and put our youth out of employment. So I currently don't support increasing the minimum wage right now. I certainly think there has to be a conversation about living wages for individuals, but that's a different story. And I think, I guess that pretty much sums it up. I think that we just shouldn't be equating a living wage to a minimum wage. The conversation is two different animals. Thank you.
Mr. Salmon.
Again, I really find myself agreeing with Mr. Candelora way too often. So I also believe that a living wage and minimum wage should not be equated in the same conversation. And I do believe it's a difficult balancing act. But what I also firmly believe is that right now the wealth inequality in Connecticut is far and above exceeded an acceptable amount. Again, we have 5 people in the state of Connecticut who are members of the Fortune 500. The inequality involved there is astounding to me. I support an increase in minimum wage. Over a period of time, I think that if we increase minimum wage while paying very close attention to the small business owners who are being affected by this increase, we can probably get away with pulling some of the corporate funding that we give these large corporations and helping small businesses in their communities to help them pay this minimum wage out, so that then we can start watching people spend money in the community. I think that if we increase the minimum wage, we will increase the value of the rest of the employees. If your lowest employee is making $10.25 an hour and then all of a sudden they're making 15, well, maybe his boss was making 15 and now they should be making 20. This is wealth equality. It's increasing the amount of money everybody is earning so that the amount of money rotating within the local economy is increased also. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comment?
Yeah, it puzzles me that franchises like Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's, Burger King's, stores like Walmart, they make hundreds of millions of dollars of profit a year. I just went to Dunkin' Donuts the other day and they went up 20 cents for a cup of tea. I bet you none of those employees got a raise, although the Dunkin' Donuts going to make millions of dollars on that 20 cents. We have to be able to have some kind of equality for the people in the state, and $10.10 an hour is not it. So why should corporations make literally a CEO make $6 or $7 or $8 million a year on the backs of employees who do the job? Thank you.
Mr. Candelora.
I just want to add to the complexity of this issue. So we heard in the news that Amazon increased their wages to $15 an hour, and everybody applauded them, but they took away the people stock options and benefits in return for that. And so by and large, I think a lot of the employees felt that they were shafted. On the same hand, in the state of Connecticut, we increased the wages for our PCAs, our personal care attendants, to $14.75 an hour. And I thought that was fair. They should be paid more. Well, that kicked them off their eligibility for Medicaid and Husky program. And so they lost their health insurance. So if we're going to have this conversation, we need to do it in a broad sense and be very careful. Because it's upsetting to me that there is proposals to push to $15 an hour. And in fact, what the outcome is going to be is all these people are going to lose their health insurance.
Mr. Sanders?
Well, no, absolutely. Again, nobody wants anybody to lose health insurance, but I do think it's important to note. I graduated high school in 1993. Minimum wage was $8.25 an hour. It's 25 years later, and it's only $2 more per hour. 25 years ago, minimum wage was $2 less than what it is now. And if nobody sees a problem with that, then I'm sorry, there's a serious inflation issue that needs to be addressed.
All right. I've been given the notice by the cameraman that we need to move to our closing statements now, and so we will start 2 minutes each with Mr. Mace.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I want to thank the other candidates for showing up and having this debate. I'd like to be the next state representative. I think it's time to have new, fresh ideas. Here are the simple facts. No matter who wins the gubernatorial race, it's going to be a new governor, new ideas, new policies. In the Senate for the 12th district, no matter who wins, going to be a new senator, new ideas, fresh ideas, new policies. I think it's time for a change. I think it's time to stay representative in Hartford, have some new ideas, new policies, and work with the other people. I ask myself, is Connecticut better off today than it was 12 years ago? And I come up with a resounding no. I heard how it took 7 months to come up with a balanced budget. I would like to take those 7 months and work on creating jobs. I would like to take those 7 months and work on building up the shoreline. I would like to take those 7 months, instead of bickering and arguing and fighting, you give me this, I give you this, so I'll take out this policy, you take out that policy. Instead, we work to grow Connecticut and put people back to work and actually try and do something with our tax structure. So I ask for your support and your endorsement and your vote so I can go to Hartford and I could do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Candelora?
Thank you, and I'm thankful everyone stayed awake through this long debate. So, Connecticut is at a crossroads. 2 years ago, when I was, entered the legislature and we didn't have a budget, and if you all recall, the governor proposed zeroing out all of our education dollars. North Branford alone was looking at an $8.5 million cut to its education funds. And the Democrats could not come up with a budget because they didn't have the votes. And they came to the other side of the aisle, and I actually remember getting the phone call from the majority leader and saying, Vin, will you sit down with us and do a budget? And I said yes. And I was one of 4 Republicans that went into the room and began negotiating a budget with them. And periodically I'd get that phone call, are you guys really serious? You're not going to pull the football out from under us like Lucy. I said, no, we really want to do a budget. And there were some Republicans that thought that I was crazy, and I got pushback. They said, Vin, if we don't do a budget and the whole state comes crashing down, we'll definitely win the majority. But the Republicans stepped up and said, that's not what the state of Connecticut deserves. And we took a different turn than what we saw at the federal level. And it did take 7 months to negotiate the budget, not because we were bickering, but because it took time to build trust, to build understanding, and to have a conversation of what policies were important to implement in the state of Connecticut. And I was proud we were able to do that. Not once, but then the second time. The second time, it only took us about 6 weeks to put the budget together because that trust was established. And I've been very proud of representing this district for the past 12 years. It's been very grueling, but very rewarding. And I've been very proud of my bipartisan record up in Hartford. And, in fact, one of the sort of traditionally Democrat organizations is actually honoring me with the Bipartisan Legislator of the Year award for the work that I have done on that budget. And I think it's important in today's day and age, in the climate that we're seeing, that we have legislators like me that will go up and work with both sides of the aisle and stay focused on good policy. Thank you. I hope I can get your support.
Thank you. Mr. Sowney.
Thank you very much for the 40 or so people that came out. Thank you so much. This is my first debate. I hope I really did the best I could. Thank you two very much for having me out here. And I'm pretty sure, actually, we agreed on just about everything, no matter if there was a few things. But boy, oh boy, if you really want a fresh look in politics, if you want somebody that's really not going to take any shit from these people up there, I am your guy. I'm a 44-year-old man from the community. I've been working very hard. I've had many jobs in many different vocations. This is one of those situations where you don't need an incumbent. You don't need somebody who has been educated by the traditional system. You don't want somebody who has been trained by the traditional system. You want somebody who has a fresh look and an outside-the-box intellect capable of reviewing the depth of all of the situations we've discussed, from, we're talking gun control down to the minimum wage here, all the way over to fiscal conservatism and the infrastructure. We discussed a lot of things here, and I'll be honest with you. If you really are looking forward to a little bit of excitement up in Hartford, I hope that I can get your support. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of the East Shore, I'd like to thank the audience for attending, our candidates for being so open on their positions on all these issues. I'd like to thank Evergreen Woods for hosting us this evening, and also to Tucket TV for recording and putting this on the air. Thank you very much for your attendance. That's it.
That's it, we're done?
Yes.